Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I am delighted to welcome you all to our Thought Leader series, The Future of Transport is Electric. My name is Megan Purdy and I'll be your host today. Firstly, in keeping with our tradition, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner, ABB. ABB is a leading global technology company that pushes the boundaries of technology to enable the transformation of society and industry to achieve a more productive, sustainable future. Innovation has been in its DNA since they were founded more than 130 years ago to take advantage of a new technology called electricity. As pioneers in electricity and automation, they help to address the world's energy challenges. Their solutions make homes, offices, factories and transport more energy efficient and safer, and energy more affordable. They envisage a future where the physical and digital worlds merge, making operations safer, more intelligent and more productive. By transforming industries, they are helping to create a more prosperous and sustainable future. For ABB, sustainability is both the right thing to do and a business opportunity. They lead by example by embedding sustainability in everything they do. They champion ethical and humane behaviour to contribute to better lives for people across the globe. I would now like to welcome our first speaker for today, Dr. Alina Dini. Dr. Dini is captivated by renewable energy innovation and how it can build long-term financial and climate resilience. Alina's experiences delivering energy and sustainability programs include working alongside some of the world's leading innovators, such as Tesla's founders and Australia's first renewable energy commissioner. As founder and CEO of Whirl, a peer-based digital marketplace reimagining the shopping experience for energy technologies like electric cars, Alina brings a human element into technology topics and works with everyday people, businesses and communities to help them harness energy innovations. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alina Dini.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here today. My name's Alina Dini, and I'm here to talk to you about the electric car market and specifically the sort of situation for consumers, a little bit around what Whirl does, and then obviously have a conversation with my peers. So kicking off, this year, in the year 2025, we're expecting 600 battery electric vehicles to be in production. It's a massive shift from where we're at now. In that same year, we expect global car manufacturing to comprise 30% of battery electric vehicle production. That's up from 15%, which we've seen in the last 5 years. And assuming that all goes to plan, the industry will grow to more than $120 billion globally. So we know that battery electric cars are coming. They're coming quickly, and the market growth is expected to be drastic in just the next 3 years. And that forecast that I mentioned is building on the growth of the market's experience so far. So far we've had roughly 10 million electric cars sold internationally. That was a figure from 2020 by the International Energy Organization. But forecasting up to 2030, there's an anticipated 125 million cars expected in just 8 years. So we know that the growth is there. That includes battery electric cars, plug-in hybrids, and to some degree fuel cell electric cars. So that's 12%. Sorry, 12 times the growth in less than 10 years. I just want to spend a quick minute talking about why we care about electric cars. That's sort of, really topical subject matter, mainly due to Tesla and the sort of viral growth of that brand. But actually, it's underpinned by two things. One, technological innovation, and two, environmental sustainability and the need for us to shift to more decarbonized solutions. So the battery electric car in this well-to-wheel emissions analysis compared by the International Clean I've just forgotten the name, the ICCT, you can see that the battery electric car, as depicted here on the right side, the second bar, is the best performing. And that's based on current sales. If you forecast that model, you can see going forward that the battery EV, as represented by that battery in the yellow boxes, continues to outperform its competitors, particularly those powered by fossil fuels. You'll see that the fuel cell vehicles, those powered by hydrogen, whether renewably generated or otherwise, are quite competitive, but still storing electricity on board a set of wheels and motoring it and powering that electricity by renewable energy is the winner. In Australia, as you can see by this picture, recently put out by the State of EVs report produced by the Electric Vehicle Council, we are still lagging behind our peers in terms of electric vehicle market growth. So Norway is by far the market leader with tons of electric vehicle policy, and reflected in that are the sales numbers that you'd expect to see in that kind of market investment. Global average is about 4%, and Australia is quite far behind that, with roughly 0.7% of our fleet converted to electric. Now, that's a statistic that represents the world in 2020. This year, we've seen a tremendous change in the growth of electric cars in Australia. So whereas last year in Australia, we saw 6,900 EVs sold, in this coming year, we have seen great growth in that 8,800 of the electric cars have been sold in the first half of the year alone. So we anticipate that coming to the end of the year with that forecast trajectory continuing, that electric cars will eclipse 1% of the total fleet in Australia and even potentially up to 1.4%. Now, despite electric cars being incredibly popular, there's still a massive preference for the Tesla. So the Model 3 shown here is the most popular electric car sold in Australia. It has been for some time, and we expect that that will continue until new models are introduced. Charging is the other variable of electric cars in the market that's a great measure of its growth. And it's also the thing that consumers say is the most problematic for them. Where do I charge and how many charging stations are available? Until I start seeing them sort of the same volume as petrol stations, I'm really not confident that the electric car market is where it needs to be. So I'm here to just show you a few statistics to demystify that. So currently we have 3,000 public chargers in Australia. 470 of them are fast, and most excitingly, given recent announcements, about 5,500 more are coming. So whatever you thought about public charging for EVs, you can now rest assured that that market is growing rapidly and will be completely able to service all of the needs of electric vehicle motorists going forward. The policy setting in Australia is a little bit less advanced. Despite great progress made by individual states, calling out especially the New South Wales government, which have announced a $500 million policy package for electric vehicles, the rest of the country as a whole is not as impressive. So by contrast, whereas global governments have spent $14 billion US on upfront incentives, Australia has spent none. What the government has done is allocated about $38 million to charging infrastructure. So we've seen that reflected in the numbers in the previous slide around the charging sector growing and the government's investment reflecting that stability. But in terms of supporting car sales and the end consumer, there's still a bit of work to be done. So consumers for electric cars shop a little bit differently than traditional vehicle consumers. In fact, 87% of people saying they're interested in an electric car actually want to do that shopping online, but they're finding insufficient amount of resources. So we know that education and awareness is still a barrier for many consumers and something that we need to overcome if we want to see those numbers in Australia tick up to the level required to be consistent with peers overseas. Also, we know that fleets are a massive target for electric vehicles. Businesses thinking about sustainability as well as wanting to be part of the e-mobility revolution for the sake of long-term economics and meeting emissions reduction goals. But for fleet operators, they typically do their shopping online. But the other part of owning an EV that's really important, especially for a fleet operator, is having an experience. So we know that having a sales model that reflects that experiential learning for fleet operators and integrating that as part of their sales experience is something that greatly converts the sales conversion rate. The other thing that I find really interesting about the current marketplace for electric cars is that the demography of the likely EV owner is changing. So previously, it was well known that early electric vehicle adopters tended to, not exclusively, because I would certainly be the exception, but tended to fall into the category of being an older, educated male who's interested in technology, perhaps with an engineering degree, someone who has an inclination toward the environment, owns their own home for the sake of off-road charging, and you would sort of be able to sort of pick one out of a crowd if you were looking for them. But that demography is changing. And what's really exciting is to see that actually younger people are taking an interest in electric cars. It might be because of that viral influence of Tesla, but that 24 to 35-year-old category have demonstrated that they're interested in wanting to understand more about what e-mobility might be for them. Similarly, we're seeing more market entrants for women. So women tend to make more than 50% of car decision-making purchases in the household. They're also enlightening to the opportunity that electric vehicles provide their motoring situation and looking for ways to be part of that market. So in general, what the statistics around consumer behavior reflect is a shift in terms of the way car buying fits into the home lifestyle. And what I like to talk about is this concept of a home energy ecosystem where the EV slots in really nicely with the other things you might be doing in your home to create more energy efficiency and sustainability measures. So the electric car, as you know, being that it's a battery on wheels and can be refueled with electricity, has the option of synergistically using, for example, rooftop solar to refill its battery. That can be programmed or timed. That can support absorption of renewable energy on the grid at times when the grid might be producing an excess supply, which we have learned is currently a problem. But it also can get the consumer thinking about how these systems work together in their home. So, utilizing energy, for example, in their home in the evening that might in due course be powered by their car. So we look for opportunities to bring the transport and energy sectors together in discussion to help awaken, I suppose, the thinking for the consumer and the business. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Whirl, my company, and how we operate in this space. So Whirl reimagines the car buying experience with a mission to make electric cars accessible to everyone. And sort of how we do this is through a digital platform where we service the market, all aspects of the market, in education and experience. We also have a 4-step process that we encourage our customers to take to learn, experience, validate their thinking about an electric car, and then ultimately educate them. So this peer-to-peer marketplace is designed to provide support at the earliest stages of car buying, educate the customers through targeted information, through experiences via our Whirl Ambassador Network, and then a validation through their tools and opportunities to compare what they are currently driving now with other options, and then eventually pass them through to some of our many industry partners by referral. How that model is different, I mentioned it's peer-driven, is that we have a national network of Whirl ambassadors. A Whirl ambassador is an existing electric car owner, some of whom have public charging accounts, some of whom have charging at home, some of whom have solar on the roof or experiences with battery storage. So they're available to speak to not only their electric car buying and owning experience, but also the build out of their own home ecosystem. They're available online on our platform for booking 7 days a week for a small fee to speak to just freely about any questions you have or stories you may want to hear about a lived experience of an electric car owner. We know from experience that the test ride is the most impactful aspect of an electric car buying experience. So in due course, we hope to shift this virtual platform to in-person, to have that peer-to-peer test drive facility in any city in the country. But right now, obviously, COVID restrictions have prevented us from being able to do that. So we're very happy to offer that session and opportunity online for customers who are seeking support through their electric car buying journey. And how that works specifically is just through this example I want to provide you. So this is John. He buys a new car every 10 years. We know we have a 1 in 10 year chance to flip a car from a fossil fuel to an electric car. So he wants to buy an electric car, but he's finding it a little bit difficult. Specifically, his unique car dealer experience didn't deliver. Sometimes it's the case that you might walk in and not have the right person there to talk to you. So he didn't get his questions answered when he took time out of his day to go and investigate the EV, and he left. So he didn't buy the EV, which is a missed opportunity. But what if, by contrast, he had met Molly? So Molly bought her EV a year ago. She loves to talk to people about it. She often gets stopped in the car park. She talks to her family and friends about all of her experiences because she loves her car that much. It's, akin to having one of the earliest smartphones. You got it and you just couldn't believe how disruptive and amazing it was. You told everyone about it. What would happen if we could connect Molly with John? Well, we'd have a perfect match, sort of a swipe right yes for Tinder for electric car shopping. But more importantly, Molly would be able to comfort John and build his confidence in that sort of de-risking thought process that he would go through around, look, I've done the maths. I know that I want to do this, even though it might not make perfect economic sense for me. But I have some concerns about just the logistics of it, just the lifestyle change. And speaking to someone like Molly can really enable him to feel confident and ready to buy. And that's really important, as I mentioned, given 1 in 10 years is when people buy cars. So if you don't have that opportunity to de-risk with another human, you might make a different decision that you're more comfortable with and not revisit again for a decade. Just want to spend a minute to talk about my experience in this sector and also why I'm passionate about this particular topic. It's quite clear that getting into an electric car is the experience required to change someone's thinking. And so I have spent many years putting people into electric cars behind the wheel and offering that experience, which is sort of what's reflected in this photo. So Whirl for me is a passion project, but it's also a reminder that the test ride experience or that in-person experience, whether you're talking to someone via Zoom, as many of us have to substitute now, or if you have an opportunity to test one in real life, gives us the confidence we need to take action. And so I'm committed to helping deliver that more broadly to everyone in Australia. And I hope that you will take an opportunity as soon as it's safe to do so to get in one and see what it's really like for yourself. So thank you so much for your time today. That's all from me.
Thank you, Alina, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome our second speaker, Brendan Grohl. Brendan is the Customer Fulfillment Strategic Sourcing Manager for IKEA Australia. He has over 30 years' experience in retail, transport and logistics leadership roles, including time with David Jones Limited, Steinhoff Group, now Greenlit Brands, prior to IKEA. Brendan is responsible for IKEA Australia's transport, delivery and services operations. This includes driving the IKEA Australia zero emission strategy and working with IKEA's service partner fleet transformation towards agreed sustainability and emission targets. Please join me in welcoming Brendan Grohl.
Thanks, Megan, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, or as we say at IKEA, hey, which means hello in Swedish. I'm sitting here on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland today, and so would like to acknowledge the Gabby people, who are the traditional custodians of the land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Jinnabara land, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who may be present with us today. And thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share a little bit around our zero emission transformation journey. This presentation today will share a little on our IKEA approach to creating a zero emission future and the benefits it will deliver for our business. I'll share a little on where we're at as a company, where we want to be, and some of the key challenges we face in the journey of transforming our transport and services operating landscape, and hopefully connect to what may be relevant to you as engineers. So I'm hoping you've all heard of us, or even better, perhaps you're customers of ours. I want to share a little bit with you on what you maybe don't know so much about IKEA. So let's start with the vision. To create a better everyday life for the many people. We've got some even newer connotations of that, such as many more of the many people, really trying to connect with everyone in all the communities we live in together. This is through our products, making affordable, sustainable and stylish home furnishings for the many, but also to create a positive impact for people, society and the planet. For us, it's about balancing economic growth and positive social impact with environmental protection and regeneration. We always think long term to be able to meet the needs of people today without compromising the needs of future generations. And for us, there are three major challenges highly relevant to our business and we believe to the broader community. They are climate change, unsustainable consumption, and inequality. By 2030, to address these major challenges, we have the following goals in our People and Planet Positive strategy, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is to become climate positive, reducing more greenhouse gas emissions than produced, which includes aiming to be 100% powered by renewable energy across the entire IKEA value chain. Become a circular business using only renewable and recycled materials, regenerating resources while growing the IKEA business, and to create positive social impact for everyone across the IKEA value chain. And this is really important for us. It's the communities in which we operate, including things like supporting refugees with workforce integration, promoting gender balance and equal pay, as well as to champion the rights and create opportunities for elderly people, ethnic groups, LGBTQ communities, and people with disabilities, for example. Coming back to the first challenge of climate change is where we see IKEA making considerable impact. It's reducing emissions within our operations through transport and customer deliveries or services that we offer. So what's the problem? Well, in the past decade, e-commerce has grown significantly. We all know that. I'm sure you've all been active consumers online over the last few years. From 2014 to 2019, e-commerce sales ratios nearly tripled globally. Without effective intervention, the number of delivery vehicles in the top 100 cities globally will increase by over 30% until the year 2030. Consequently, global emissions from delivery traffic will increase by 32%, and congestion will rise by over 21%. Around the world, more and more cities are moving towards diesel reduction and restrictions. So at IKEA, we've recognised that this means we have to act now. And so we can ensure that we can continue to deliver to our customers in the future and potentially into metropolitan areas that we may not be permitted to in future, using typical fossil fuels such as diesel. But in Australia, we aren't acting with the same urgency as many other places in the world. Transport is the third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And without action, transport emissions will continue to rise. Australia is one of a handful of OECD countries without greenhouse gas emission reduction targets or standards for vehicles to change. We lack credible national policy to tackle emissions today. In Australia alone, transport emissions have gone up by 64% since 1990, which is the largest increase of any sector. So essentially, what's a big challenge for our nation is also a big challenge for our business and what we take on. I mean, mobility is a basic prerequisite. You know, it's how we commute, how we travel, how we source, what we operate, what we own, what we lease, and in particular, what we focus on today is what services we offer. These are all elements that need a strong sustainability and emission reduction mandate. And here, I just wanted to share a bit of a snapshot of IKEA Australia so you understand the operating landscape that we have today. You can see we've got customer meeting points. These essentially are IKEA-defined sites such as stores or distribution centres or even external warehouse locations that our customers may meet us to purchase or collect their orders from today. We've got units performing fulfilment, critical to the services we offer. These are the IKEA sites that we dispatch orders from to customers, such as stores and distribution centres, and undertake what you might term B2C, final mile, transport and deliveries. And then, of course, there's units performing replenishment. These are the IKEA-defined locations that receive and dispatch stock to our customer meeting points, with transport connected, such as inbound ocean freight, for example, and then land transport activities, including port cartage or interstate line haul, terms you might be familiar with. And to give some very brief context to what we're focusing on in today's presentation and under my personal remit, I can share that we do 1.2 million deliveries per annum when you include our parcel business and our flat pack furniture delivery business. And that's taking our last fiscal year's data. And assembly, which is a service for those customers that don't want to assemble themselves, And I also just want to add that we've added this service to our online offer. So we still see huge growth potential with this particular service. You're sitting around 15,000 services per annum today. Okay, what's our ambition? By 2025 is to aim for 100% of transport for customer deliveries and services to use electric vehicles or other zero-emission solutions that may come along. By 2025, all owned, leased and shared vehicles in our fleet to be EV or other zero-emission options. And by 2030, aim to reduce relative emissions by 50% from co-worker and customer travel for our physical touchpoints. So for final mile truck deliveries, we've set an Australian target for our fiscal year FY22 of 25% zero emission. So consider that to be around 150,000 deliveries. And to clarify, that's our fiscal period that commenced on the 1st of September 2021 and runs through to 31st of August 2022. So as market leaders, we thought that we needed an aggressive target, and that's what we've set. And then for EV charging, we also have an ambition to provide access to EV charging stations at all of our touch points for customers, co-workers and service partners. To fulfil IKEA global commitments regarding emission-free travel for co-workers and customers and transportation of goods, the electricity of the charging infrastructure must come from renewable energy sources. So that could include things like solar on our own sites, for example. And there's also an IKEA recommendation, which is also quite important to share. The external charging infrastructure for all kinds of EVs needed for an IKEA facility or business purpose should preferably be owned by an external service partner, or ESP we sometimes call them. So this means the ESP has the responsibility for necessary permits, design, installation, operation and maintenance of the EV charging infrastructure. And the EV charging infrastructure should be connected to the public grid. So hopefully this presents a bit of an opportunity for you as today's audience. So you've seen we've got some pretty big ambitions to realise, but we cannot do it alone. We are, however, determined here at IKEA, but we want and need to work with other businesses and government to unite and drive the transition to zero emissions future. The approach we take here in Australia to achieving our zero emissions goal is through our existing model of service delivery with external service partners. We believe this is the right approach right now to be advocating for electrification to help develop the market most critically and drive scale for positive change for the many and the broader community. However, it's not to say it's the way we'll always do things. I mean, as a company, we're quite nimble and constantly trying new ways of doing things to find solutions to reach our goals, and we will always remain agile in that regard. So, where are we, you're wondering? In 2019, IKEA became the first home furnishing retailer in Australia to implement EV for home delivery and assembly services, something we're really proud of. Since then, we've worked with our delivery partners, Australian National Couriers, King's Transport and All Purpose Transport, as well as our home furniture assembly partners, Install to You, and now more recently, Install Easy and Assemble Anything, to implement home deliveries and assembly services using electric vehicles across Australia. Currently, there's 11 EV vehicles for last mile home delivery across the states that we operate in. We have the ambition to hit a milestone of 25% in this year we're operating in partnership with our delivery service providers. Today, we sit around that 8 to 9% mark. So it's a real challenge we face right now, in particular because our volumes are increasing at such a rapid rate and faster than we can bring on new EV vehicles. And for our assembly partners, Install to You, we currently have 2 vehicles, one servicing Melbourne Metro and one in Brisbane, and we'll soon launch another 2 in Sydney with Install Easy. So some good and positive milestones that we can share there, but I'm sure you can agree it's really just the start point for us. And where could we be? I think this is worth sharing with you a little bit when you consider that we IKEA are a global organisation. Our Global Zero Emission Task Force has helped to set the scene. They work collaboratively with us out in the markets and have aimed to set some high impact outcomes. We came up with a prioritised cities strategy and selected these cities for urgent and immediate action. And while the pandemic has caused some disruption, We're now well on the way to achieving 100% EV in these particular cities: New York, Amsterdam, Paris, Shanghai, and Los Angeles. But in addition to that, we all make commitments at a country or a market level. So, for example, in FY22, I've shared with you our goal in Australia is 25% zero emission. However, I can share these good examples. Italy, for example, are going for over 50% this year. And then there's a cohort of other markets: France, Portugal, Austria, Norway, the Netherlands, Finland, Canada, and the US are all aiming for 40%. So a little more aggressive than us here in Australia. These markets either have faced or continue to face the same challenges that we have. And while we overcome the challenges at different speeds, we can also take the learnings from country to country and find opportunities. But be clear that there's challenges everywhere. We all face the same scenarios. At the end of the spectrum in Shanghai, IKEA has already achieved its goal of having 100% of home deliveries powered by EV. Something, again, we're really proud of and look to them as leaders. IKEA China has already been able to achieve 93% of national home deliveries from zero-emission transport in the last fiscal year, FY21. But if we look at the enabling context, what is it that's allowed China to get there? Well, since 2009, the Chinese government has offered subsidies and tax waivers and built charging points to encourage EV buyers and manufacturers. This has really created the preconditions for the EV market to scale and scale with speed, something we're missing here in Australia, unfortunately. So what are the challenges? I'd like to kind of share how we see it from an Australian perspective now. We'll focus firstly on cost, range and performance. Most of the delivery partners have started their journey to electrify their fleets, which is great news. However, the underdeveloped market and prohibitive regulatory conditions in Australia mean that we cannot scale or increase the pace fast enough to get more commercial EVs on the road until we have firm EV policy, investment and a timeline for a transition at national level. There's simply not enough trucks available right now, today, for take-up. And costs remain prohibitively high, and while performance remains far from our expectations. Today, there's really only a few providers of commercial electric vehicles in the Australian market, and unfortunately, they cost approximately 2 to 3 times more than the equivalent diesel combustion vehicles. Additionally, available vehicles cannot perform at the required levels to meet regular business needs. This includes how we, or in particular our own customers at IKEA, expect us to offer our delivery services. We want to be able to offer convenient and affordable services and therefore need equipment to support that ambition. So think about delivery windows, service price expectations, could be authority to leave and things like that. Then there's battery technology is limited with the current commercial options, and combined with a lack of charging infrastructure means distance is constrained to metropolitan areas with reduced operating capacity and drive range. And we see on-road and technical support is still embryonic in the marketplace. This includes warranty and servicing structures offered for those few available EVs for purchase today, but also support networks for breakdowns and battery issues that may occur en route or during operations in day-to-day activity. We expect this is a precondition to operate effectively. Then there's infrastructure, of course. Transport supply chains don't operate within state and territory borders, as we all know. With some state governments taking action, for commercial electric vehicles to be viable long-term, delivery solution, we need a national policy that recognises electric vehicle infrastructure as an essential infrastructure, just as we do for roads and rail or poles and wires for electricity, for example. For long distances and interstate potential, wide-scale fast charging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure is critical for businesses like ours to achieve zero emissions deliveries and services in Australia. We need to see targeted investment for infrastructure to enable business fleets to transition. IKEA is installing charging stations at all of its own sites, which includes our distribution centres and our stores for customers. But we need certainty on electric charging points throughout the metropolitan areas. What does the network look like? How can our service partners connect into that? And then there's demand, timing and placement of charging infrastructure. This also needs to be considered in more of a long-term way. Commercial vehicles will return from deliveries during the day, potentially, and need to charge in peak times. So to encourage dispersal from central facilities like industrial estates, we believe incentivising the purchase of battery solutions for businesses should be considered, and that'll help ensure grid stability and access to chargers. And then finally, there's availability and competition. Currently, the lack of EV competition offers no incentive for business, large or small, to invest in zero-emission vehicles and create wide-scale take-up of EV. All levels of government have the potential to aggregate their commercial fleets, for example, to encourage competition in the Australian market. This would really incentivise other manufacturers to bring zero-emission vehicles into the Australian market and open up more affordable and diverse options to business and the broader public. I mean, I've personally had several discussions with global OEMs who just don't see the commercial sense in trying to enter or penetrate the Australian market right now. We should also be looking at the subsidy potential for EV trucks for primary purchases, which will accelerate the take-up from private users and support the development of a market for second-hand vehicles. This will support bringing confidence to those with ambition today to then want to take that next step, that bold next step, and potentially purchase an EV today, right now, and create a life cycle for this type of equipment. We feel businesses here are starting to recognise the important role that they play in addressing this issue, and they want to take action. But IKEA, nor any other business with zero-emission targets here in Australia, will be able to achieve these goals within the current policy environment. So I hope this frames some of the key challenges, but also the opportunity that at least we see and hopefully you see in the marketplace today. And then on the screen is just a graphic from an IKEA campaign that's running at the moment. Excuse me. Hopefully you might have seen it on the TV already this week. It's our Live Fully, Tread Lightly campaign. It's something we truly believe in this business. Together we can help reduce the impact your little world has on the big world we all share, because the smaller our footprints, the greater the good for the planet we all share. So I'd like to leave you with that sentiment. Tack and thank you, as we say. Really looking forward to answering any questions you might have about IKEA or our zero-emission approach, and that you got something really good out of this presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan, for your insights. I would now like to welcome our final speaker for today, Sean Stove. Sean Stove is ABB Australia's Head of Transformation and Rail Segments, having been involved in the rail sector since 2003. Joining ABB in 1997, Sean has held numerous senior roles in sales, operations, and business development across Asia Pacific and Europe. In this role, he is responsible for leading ABB's offering to the rail and transportation industry, from innovative solutions for rolling stock propulsion to energy-efficient solutions for power infrastructure to software optimization for asset health and management. After completing his electrical certificate from Christchurch Polytechnic, Sean became a graduate of the University of Queensland's Mount Eliza MBA program and completed the Senior Leadership Development Program at the International Institute for Management Development in Lausanne, Switzerland. Please join me in welcoming Sean Stove.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Megan. As you heard, I've been with ABB for some time, and it's really remarkable to see the progression towards electric vehicles that have occurred during my career with ABB. So firstly, just a little bit about ABB. ABB consists of four main business areas. There's robotics and discrete automation, and they provide automated machines for industry, particularly manufacturing, food and beverage. Motion is all about moving things. So in motion, we're globally #1 for electric motors and variable speed drives. That, of course, comes into play with electric vehicles as well. We're a supplier of independent propulsion systems and battery energy storage from motion. Electrification, that's all about wayside infrastructure, substations, switchgear, and chargers, of course. And ABB's leader in the world with electric vehicle chargers. The other area of our business is process automation, and process automation integrates a lot of those solutions together and provides solutions for marine and mining industries, amongst many others. ABB's visions really has been to achieve a zero emission reality. Transport is a very, very large source of CO2. I think, as it says here, 24% of the world's emissions come from transportation, and I think in Australia it's about 19%. And that's a 60% growth since 1990. So it's essential that if we want to have a zero emission future in this country, we really need to tackle emissions in vehicles. And there's 88,000 buses in Australia, and presently, overwhelming majority of them are burning diesel and internal combustion engines. And electrical energy efficiency and decarbonisation is really in ABB's DNA. I mean, we've been delivering emission-free transport solutions for over 130 years, but now really is the time when this transition is really moving ahead very quickly. In regard to the electrification, our EV charging infrastructure business, this globally is a team of about 750 people. When the slide was produced, I think there were about 14,000 chargers we'd supplied around the world. I think it's over 18,000 now. Chargers in over 80 countries, and again, the figures in terms of numbers of kilowatt delivered just to keep on increasing along with the growth of the business. And also, we supply we're an independent supplier of propulsion systems. So this is very, very large business for ABB in regard to rail infrastructure and rail rolling stock. But currently, ABB's largest electric bus rapid transit fleet, which is the Brisbane Metro fleet, that's on order. The first ones are being delivered now. 60 of those big bi-articulated vehicles, they're being propelled by ABB propulsion systems. Charging infrastructure by ABB as well. So I'm going to touch on three main areas while I talk today in terms of challenges to fleet operators. First one I'm going to talk about is interoperability, talk a bit about energy supply, and then a bit about digitalization and connectivity. So, electric motors are really good at what they do. They provide low-end torque, seamless transmission. You can stop them and start them very, very quickly and efficiently. And they have a very low operation and maintenance costs because the energy from the sun and wind, once it's harnessed, is essentially free. And electric charging stations can be safely located in places where you can't easily put diesel or petrol refueling, like in airport precincts and things like that. Electrical charging stations are safer options. Interoperability. Well, ABB's been a foundation member in organisations that have been working to harmonise charging standards, both the charging standards we have now and also the standards that are developing as time goes by. So because we're going to be looking at higher and higher power in the future as we move towards charging larger and larger batteries for heavier and heavier loads. So when you install chargers that comply to these standards, you're ensuring that you've got the greatest potential for future future-proof, future interoperability. There are a variety of different connection methods for chargers that are around at present that comply with these standards. Traditionally, smaller AC chargers can be used for long charging of small electric vehicles, such as overnight or when you're parked at the office for the day. But DC charging is most appropriate for faster and higher power charging, and that's why we're seeing much more DC chargers being installed now, because as power requirements get larger and larger and the cabling sizes get larger and larger, it makes manual plug connections increasingly impractical. So that's resulted in a move towards automated connections. and by automating those connections, such as you'll find in bus stops, where the pantograph goes up or goes down, the speed of connection can be increased a lot as well, and that can align with the dwell time. So the time that passengers are alighting and boarding the vehicle. Some cases, 20 seconds or less to give a flash charge to the vehicle to allow it to proceed to the next stops. And these can also, this charging, this opportunity charging, can also be aligned with terminus stops, where a driver may be on a break for 5 minutes and then you've got a longer charge time can be available. This principle has been applied in Brisbane for the Brisbane Metro, and that results on less onboard storage required, so less dependence on depot charging. So if your vehicles are running till late at night and starting early in the morning or 24 hours a day, you don't have to be so concerned about having them parked up in a depot where they're not moving people and they're not creating any revenue. And there's also, of course, workplace safety aspects to this as well. Automated connection eliminates any manual handling risk. Yeah, so this is another interesting example of where automated charging has been applied in Tuas, which is a container port in Singapore. So Tuas, very, very busy container point. These are fully automated vehicles, so they're driverless vehicles, and they're moving the capacity to move 60 million containers a year. And that's built around some infrastructure of 18 450 kilowatt fast charging stations with a customized pin type connector, fully automated pin type connector. And you'll even see here that there's actually some solar charging on the top of those buildings in order to further enhance the network. But we'll talk about energy shortly. But this is just really the start, because heavy vehicles need even higher charging currents. So we're working, with industry groups to develop this megawatt charging standard, which is working now to support up to 3 and 4.5 megawatt charging capacities. And ABB is actually participating with 21 global mining companies in the Charge On Challenge. And they're seeking to transfer 400 kilowatt hours, which is the energy required in a single typical haul cycle for an ore truck, in order to have zero emission ore trucks. And ABB has been shortlisted to develop the solution for the application. So the second challenge is energy supply. And energy supply is all about having the right energy at the right place at the right time. It's an essential component of the rollout of electrical vehicles. So, there's an energy capacity limit in our network. I mean, there's lots of factors to that. A lot of sites don't have great physical space available, but there's lots of different ways of resolving that. You can put battery energy storage systems in place in order to avoid demand peaks, and enable you to synchronize your energy flow, and so you're not so dependent on the grid, and localized conventional or renewable power plants on site. But they're going to be required. We're going to need to look at some significant changes in the way we look at the energy grid. And 3 things that should be considered is that, firstly, as you're doing your initial rollout, optimize the location of your charging capacity to where there's currently capacity in the grid. Where local renewables and battery energy storage can be integrated into the local network, this can moderate the requirement for major new feeders and substations. But in the long run, I think we're going to have to look at reinforcing and developing the grid to where we project future charging capacity is expected to occur. This is an example of an integrated solution. I mean, like it's an integrated solution for to deliver energy for charging and depot locations because it's sort of pre-assembled and modular. You reduce the risks of doing the modifications, on site because you can just drop the thing in. It's a very safe system, so it can be where, for example, you might have a opportunity charging station. A unit like this can power it in a public location because it complies to IEC requirements for public installations. There's no fencing or security required, and that because it's also a so-called temporary solution, it also makes obtaining permits to install a lot lower, and that can save a lot on cost as well. We'll talk more about digital connectivity later, but this also integrates intelligent energy management and predictive maintenance. That gives you deep insights into the performance of the charger in-site and for the site and at a network level. And here's an example of one that was installed in Italy recently. So it has optimized load management. It's compact, so it fits the minimum footprint. The customer doesn't require a great level of competency in order to have one of these systems installed. It's got installed battery energy storage system, medium voltage switchgear, control system. It powers 15 tera 124 high power DC chargers, and each of these charges 2 vehicles, so it suits a depot with 30 electric buses in it. I think that the other factor about as electric vehicles get rolled out, for commercial properties, I think there's going to be huge drivers in commercial property to ensure that they have vehicle charging installed on the site. I think as far as real estate's concerned, it's going to be a big bonus if you're trying to lease a property to have vehicle storage, energy charging, vehicle charging installed. People, providing this service for customers and for your staff, really important. And shoppers that are charging their vehicles are going to stay at your premises a lot longer than they would otherwise. So the final thing I'd like to discuss is digitalization. Digitalization is and connectivity of these installations is really important. Although, coming back to the basics here, although Australia hasn't been as fast as others, the tipping point's here. There are going to be many bus and car OEMs are bringing in vehicles now. Some governments are actually providing some incentive to move towards electric vehicles. Regrettably, some not so much. But vehicles are coming, and we need to make sure that they're interoperable so that they can, as we discussed earlier, so that your fleet can be flexible. We need to work out how this works with the grid. And the fifth thing, though, is we need to have connectivity between the equipment 24/7, secure and safe. Certainly, cybersecurity is an essential consideration. If you're running a fleet of vehicles, you don't want to have disruption from malign influence to impact on fleet safety or performance. But there's also, you need to have connection for onboard metering, for billing, for subscriber management. There's also the field of serviceability, remote diagnostics, troubleshooting, managing your power. I'll talk a little bit more about load balancing in the next slide, but by remote diagnostics, enable the most effective preventative maintenance, and this, reduces or eliminates your loss of availability while you're conducting your service, because you can predict when it's going to happen, and you can schedule it at a time when it's going to have the least impact on your operations. And also application programming interface, which enables integration with advanced web tools, on-site public displays, and it's a scalable system. So as your system grows, this information can be scaled across multiple sites, and as yeah. You can use internal networks for data. It can be facilitated, but there are lots of benefits in utilizing third-party clouds with more advanced diagnostics, easier to access 24/7 monitoring by third parties, and automated service activation. I suppose when it comes to load management, the core issue is don't blow the fuse. so you don't want to you don't be charging loads that exceed the capacity of the local energy network. But the second thing is to sort of reduce the optimal cost across the whole process. That'll sort of peak shave and reduce your peak demand and reduce your energy cost by that method. And then you can optimize your site by utilizing solar, wind, renewable energy, energy management in buildings, and you can do that before you maybe need to enhance the capacity from the network with new grid infrastructure, which is a cost-effective thing to do as well. But information can also be used to sort of predict your local load profiles, and that enables potentially surplus stored energy to be traded into the grid, and then optimizing the local network capacity and the utilization of local generation capacity. It's going to go back now to onboard systems as well, because this is where connectivity is also really important, because through this you can collect energy storage system data and traction control system data, connect it up into the cloud. You can store that energy in the cloud, but you can also enrich store that data in the cloud, but you can also enrich that data by performance data of entire populations and components, which can provide a context that improves the modeling of the aging and health of your equipment. You can visualize trends, performance indicators. You can see aspects of driver behavior that might impact on the long-term performance and the aging of the battery and the components in the system. And this is a huge impact, can have a huge impact on the rate of return on investment of the vehicle, because battery life is dependent on a wide range of application and environmental factors. Early cell replacement, replacing an individual cell rather than the whole battery, can maximize the collective battery performance in life. You can define improvement and mitigation actions. As I mentioned, if you identify driver behavior that's not optimal, you can train the person to drive the vehicle in a more energy efficient way. That can have a large impact on battery life too. And having this improved information enables us to optimize the specification for additional fleet, because you may find that the battery life is longer or shorter than you might initially have expected. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention and look forward to discussing this further with you.
Thank you, Sean, for your insights. Now's the time where our speakers will all come together to take your questions. So if you would like to ask a question of our panel, please do so via the chat box. So if you could just provide your name and who the question is for, and we'll be able to ask those questions to our panel. Now, we have received some questions on registration, so a big thank you to everyone who actually put forward some questions when they registered for today's event. So we might kick off with a couple of those. So the first question, and I might kind of direct this one to the panel. The question is, and it's from Trevor in New South Wales. His question: motorists are reluctant to purchase electric cars because there are few charging stations. On the other hand, companies are hesitant to put in charging stations because there are few electric cars. Who needs to make the first move? So who would like to kick off? Alina?
Yeah, happy to answer that question. This concept of the chicken and the egg is one that really emerges regularly in the EV industry. Do the cars come first, or do the chargers? And look, my view is that it's incumbent upon the leadership of industry and government to make an investment in what we want our future to look like. And in my view, that future is net zero related to emissions, more integrated in terms of how we perceive technology across the transport and energy sectors, and in terms of the commercial offering, a bit more sophisticated than what we've seen in the past. So I would argue that as a business, you can't go wrong in making an investment in the e-mobility future, because the confidence that kind of a commissioning brings for consumers is exactly what is necessary to drive more business to your front steps.
Awesome. Sean?
Yeah, well, I also think that the change is already happening. So I think that the EV Council, in their report a year ago, was suggesting there are 2,000 charging stations across Australia, and I think now the number is over 3,000. So the rollout is really progressing well. Many state governments are moving rapidly moving towards encouraging rollouts across the big geospatial areas that we have in Australia, the big distances we have in Australia. And I think that there's some commercial incentives to businesses in installing batteries on their premises. I recall when Tesla were first rolling out their charging fleet in the United States, instead of approaching service stations on the main arterial routes, they went to the towns just to the side of them and suggested to people, if you want customers to come and stop where your restaurant is or where your business is, where your theme park is, or install some charging, because that's going to be a win-win situation for both you and for the electric vehicle owner.
Awesome. Thanks. Brendan, did you want to answer that one as well?
I'd love to support with a response. I agree fully with the other panelists actually on this point. I mean, it does start, of course, with the government having policy and so forth to allow the charging to be in place. But certainly the way we look at this topic is both ends. So we need to have a strategy around vehicles and electric vehicle types, but we absolutely need to know that there's a network available to support us. And we're talking about home deliveries in this case, where it's not static point-to-point type delivery. So we need to make sure that there's networks developing in the markets and the areas we want to deliver. And so for me, it also opens up opportunity. And I think, sessions like we're in today, talking with peers in the market, we should all be looking at this particular topic as not starting, but has started. And so there's many opportunities around us for these kind of things, and we need to sort of step in and start to make the change together.
Awesome, thanks. Well, probably off the back of that question, there was quite a lot of questions that came in on registration and through the chat today. And it was around, I suppose, how Australia compares to the rest of the world with EVs. So, Marion from registration asked that question. I think Kelvin and Jeff came through live and in various factors about it. But, how are we placed compared with the rest of the world in this area? Who would like to kick off?
Well,
I'll go, Alina.
I think
Everyone's very excited to answer this question because it's certainly one where we feel there's opportunity for improvement. Look, in Australia, as I showed on my slides, we have less than 1% of electric vehicles representing the total vehicle fleet, which is pretty insignificant relative to the international average of roughly 4%. And if you look at some of the countries that are much more advanced, China, Norway, or substantially below that. But I think it's really unfair to compare Australia to Norway, for example. We don't have the same circumstances around renewable energy generation or government support. So whether we need to compare ourselves to an international peer, I think is one question. The other question is, in terms of where we think we need to be, what's missing? And I would point out, I think my peers will have some additional comments to make, that the government policy is lacking, but more than anything, what I believe is lacking is leadership. So this declaration that electric vehicles are positive for Australia, that we're committed to a seamless transition to incorporating them into the fleet, both in relation to vehicles and charging, and that we are working through all aspects of that as a society, really, because it is partly about government, but it is also partly about how we as businesses and individuals contribute to that outcome.
Awesome.
Yep.
Sean or Brendan?
I'm happy to jump in,
Yeah.
Sean, if you don't mind. Just in terms of the other markets, I mean, it's really quite interesting, and I shared in my slides. We in our business, we've got a bit of a running scoreboard, if you like, and we do check in on each other to see who's leading, and in particular, where are the opportunities? Like, what's different and what's driving the change? And of course, again, we point towards policy and direction, and what we really lack here, as Alina says, is leadership, but in particular targets, like, what are we trying to achieve? It does feel like we've got one foot in and one foot out. But that could be the way we operate with our electric vehicles. For example, we can take learnings on, how we route delivery runs and things of that nature, and there can be operational benefits there. And again, we start to point towards other sectors and other opportunities, like how does it sort of come together in other markets? So, for us, we do work closely with the other countries and look into those markets for opportunity, and how can we sort of develop that in our space.
And I think that, there's other aspects as well. I mean, other countries might have a greater integration between the energy network and the providers of public transport, for example. So it may not be the optimum solution for a bus just to charge up in the depot at night. It means your battery's got to keep you going all day. Whereas, as has been demonstrated with Brisbane Metro and is rolled out in many countries around the world, that if you locate opportunity charging at different route points, at different strategic points through your bus network, then you're able to dramatically reduce your dependency on having a very large battery to charge at the depot each night.
Awesome. Just to jump into another question, and this one is from Pereira, and I think you touched upon it, Sean, in your presentation. It was about, what about infrastructure in rural areas? And I did see that came up a little bit in the chat box. So, how Australia, just how big we are versus some of these overseas countries. And the question, was just about infrastructure in rural areas.
I think that where state governments have been involved in encouraging the rollout of charging capacity, they've been very mindful of making sure that it covers a network, so you can travel around the entire state, or for that matter, around the country. And that, I think, strategically from state governments that are positive about the move to electric vehicles, this dispels one of the great hesitancies that's been played on by governments that may not be so enthusiastic about the transition, because of the concern about Australia being such a very large place. But with the increasing range of vehicles now, with the rollout of faster and faster charging solutions, and the continuing improvement of energy mass density of batteries, I think this is. I don't think this is going to be a problem for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Did anyone want to add to that one?
I can just, maybe from my perspective, Megan, a little bit of insight, I suppose. I mean, with the first question, we spoke about the EV charging and sort of what should come first. And I think this one's really important, because there's an opportunity for organisations like ourselves at IKEA to partner with others and help build the density, if you like. And I think it's that kind of density and market intel that we can take to the innovators and help design what the network needs to look like. Because when we talk about rural areas, of course, here in Australia, we've got vast territories to cover, but there's certainly areas and pockets where we can focus in. maybe connect that as well to the kind of strategy and direction. It might be that we can identify some areas where we really sort of target and pilot this kind of development in a strong way, and then build out from there. But it's a really interesting topic, and I do see that we can kind of work with others to build the density and the mass, if you like.
Awesome. There was just another question, just kind of going into more, I suppose, in how you incorporate car battery storage into grid storage. Matthew is one of our viewers watching live, and he posed that one to you, Sean. So how can we start incorporating car battery storage into grid storage for use during the peak demand times?
Well, I think that having an integrated approach to your local energy network, ABB's Ability platform enables you to do that through, and that integrates many aspects of not only optimizing your energy on your particular home or site, but the other aspect of a battery, of course, is its life is dependent to some degree on cycles. So we've explored this locally in Australia on several occasions, and there is and we also do have some barriers in Australia with the grid's capacity in many areas to be able to accept this type of feed-in. But also cycling your vehicle battery even more will have an impact on the life of that battery, and if it's and that may be of consequence as well.
There were a few questions that did come through on registration and also live, which was around how toxic are EVs in regards to their disposability and battery replacement. So if the panel would like to comment upon the battery side of things and the toxicability. Alina, did you want to kick off this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think it's incredibly important to remind everyone that we use batteries in our day-to-day life for a number of different electrical appliances, whether it's your laptop or your mobile phone or your TV remote. There are different battery chemistries, obviously, and with that, they have different feature sets. But in terms of an electric vehicle, the composition of the battery most widely used is lithium-ion. And because the automotive industry and the energy industry have been looking at this problem set for a long time, there are a couple of different pathways that are being introduced into the marketplace to resolve the problem that is the end-of-life battery. So one example is the second life application of a battery once it's taken out of a vehicle. So when your electric vehicle is no longer perhaps suitable for driving because the battery has depleted such that it's sort of not delivering the range that a consumer would expect. Maybe the car is still okay, but typically a car, has a usable life of around 10 years. Those batteries can be put into a second purpose. So one example of that second purpose is to provide storage to the grid. So we talked about that vehicle to grid or vehicle to home concept just a moment ago in the previous question. So that battery storage can be used in residential or in commercial settings. And those kinds of pilots are underway globally to see how viable that can be to provide grid solutions. The second is actually battery recycling. So there are a number of companies that are finding a commercial offering from taking batteries and unpacking them and utilizing some of the minerals and resources that can be found in the composition of the battery and selling them. So there are things like cobalt and gold that can be reused and actually sold on to pay for the cost of that dismantling process.
Can I add to that as well, Megan? Yeah, absolutely everything that Alina said. For us at IKEA, we've got a really green thread that runs through our business, and we're forever talking about the circular economy. And I guess one good example I can share in how we approach that would be mattresses. We sell mattresses to consumers, but we'll take a really strong position on mattresses should not go to landfill, for example. And so we find ways to be able to repurpose, recycle, reuse, and really respect the waste hierarchy. Here it's no different with the batteries. It's not that we put the vehicles on and sort of forget about that. We take that as a challenge, and some of those ideas and solutions that Alina has mentioned is what we would take as a challenge and I guess as an opportunity as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge potential for, and I think in the interim, I mean, like I know that there's complications in recycling the materials of lithium-ion batteries, but that technology is advancing rapidly as well. But the second life use of vehicle batteries is a very good example of of reusing, because I mean, like in applications in transportation, I mean, like we look at battery lives 8 to 12 years at least with our current technology, but when its battery range is limited to maybe maximum capacity of 80%, the density of that is not so useful for a vehicle that has to move around the mass. But it's ideal for use to back up static installations, like wind farms, to back up wind farms and back up the solar farms. It's very, very good second use for them.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you all. I'll move on to the next question. And this one again, there's been a lot of talk about it online with the chat today. And the question was, where do we see hydrogen fitting into the future of transportation? So, Brendan, did you want to kick off this one?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I can take a shot at that one. This is a really great point to raise up, actually. It's one that we've come across a few times now. So as I've shared, we at IKEA today work with transport service partners sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. So sorry, would you mind repeating the question again, just so I...
No, that's all right. Where do you see hydrogen fitting into the future?
Yeah, got it. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. It's more that with the current equipment, we've gone for EV because it's an emerging technology and we know it's available here today. And obviously for us, IKEA, we look into other markets around the world and we can see this is the way forward for those markets. And indeed, for us, we've actually changed our approach and talk more about zero emissions than we do with electric so much these days. And as we see technology developing over the coming years, we would see hydrogen being one of those really key and important changes that comes along. And one of the key things for us is the distance that we currently get with battery and the electric vehicle types. It appears that hydrogen might be the technology we need to be able to go those longer distances, whether it's rural or interstate transport, for example. So we've already started taking that on board, and in discussions with vehicle manufacturers and so forth, it looks like the technology development will be more of a coexistence, if you like. So in a single commercial vehicle type could indeed have battery electric vehicle, but also have hydrogen supporting. So it's not sort of one or the other. It's more that both can exist in the same vehicle type.
Awesome. Sean, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think just reinforcing what Brendan says. I mean, basically when you're moving either to a battery electric vehicle or a hydrogen vehicle, essentially the core components of it are the same, just with the addition of the hydrogen fuel cell. So you're already putting in place the DC to DC converter and the electric motors and those components, and those technologies are common. The hydrogen fuel cell is just effectively another method on board that you can use to charge the electrical propulsion system.
Can I add something, Megan? Just from the lens of consumer adoption and maturity in the marketplace, what I'll just say is, I think where a lot of us are coming from is electric vehicle technology, meaning battery operated transport is at a technology readiness level that is ripe for implementation. And that's why we're seeing so much global investment, both in products and services that align with that thinking. It's not to say there isn't a place for hydrogen. We know the Australian market in particular is very excited about the potential of hydrogen for vehicle fueling, but the maturity of that technology and its implementation forecast is just slightly behind electric vehicles. So while I think we're progressing those solutions forward, in the industry, the advancement of EVs is just a little bit ahead of where hydrogen is, and that's perhaps better applicable to for utilization at the moment.
Thank you all. Sean, I've got a very specific question directed at yourself. It came in from Anerga. You alluded to the requirement of power grid reinforcement. Any large-scale and diverse EV requirements will require matching grid strengthening, if I can get my words out. Sorry about that. Any thoughts?
Well, it's a really, really big subject. Really big subject, because really to project, this is based on how we project the localized renewable energy generation in the local area relative to what we project the number of electric vehicles on the road are going to be, and we're, I think, around 2% or 2.6% of new vehicles being EVs now. So it is going to require some significant thinking about how we improve the grid for the demands of the future. It's a very, very big question to answer here now.
Awesome. Did anyone want to try for that one, or I can move on to the next one? We've got a heap of questions. So again, this one was for you, Brendan, specific to, I suppose, your presentation. It was around, I think in your presentation you spoke about where IKEA are doing different things, and John has actually asked a specific question of yourself: why can IKEA do it in China but not Australia? So hoping you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need to go back to the policy framework and the environment that they've got to operate in. I mean, we have seen back in 2009, the Chinese government started to heavily invest in this segment, in this sector. So, for example, there's any number of vehicle manufacturers that are domestic manufacturers that are not for the export market, but there's quite an availability of electric vehicle technology type, because those producers have been well supported and subsidised by their government. And so for us, like the IKEA organisation, when we go to market, it's almost like we would go to market here and just find diesel combustion alternatives all around. So for the Chinese market, it's quite different, and it's because of that environment and landscape that's been created to really bring it along. And they've had the same goals and the same timeframes as most other markets, but they've been able to sort of step into that in a really active way, and a lot sooner than many other places.
Okay, excellent. Alina, there was a question for yourself. And it's from Jeff Dyer, and he said, is the rental car market a place to give people the opportunity to experience the EV vehicle? How are these businesses placed in this space?
That's my favorite question. As I explained in my presentation, offering prospective electric car customers an opportunity to get in the car, behind the wheel preferably, and experience electric motoring is the way to change someone's perspective on what it means to support electric vehicles, but also to consider owning and operating one. So there are a couple of opportunities for test driving an EV. So the obvious one in the first instance is to go to a car dealer, but that's obviously a sales environment. So it's up to you if that's the kind of option for you. The second is, you asked about rental in particular. I am not aware of any rental companies that offer an EV for rental, at least not the bigger ones in Australia, but there is an electric car sharing company called evee.com.au that does electric car experiences mainly around Teslas nationally. So that's one option. There are also a couple of subscription services for electric vehicles that enable you to get behind the wheel for a period of a couple of months to try one out before you buy. So those are offered by CarBar, both through AGL and Sonnen. So packages there that you can check out. And then, Whirl had originally the intention to offer peer-to-peer test rides, kind of like what you would experience through one of the car enthusiast associations or community groups, but just more localized. But given COVID, we've had to postpone the rollout of that program. So that could be available soon. But in the interim, I think probably the easiest bet is to look out on social media for events or try one of the products I mentioned.
Excellent, thank you. We are coming up to the end, so probably the next question or two I have is around, I suppose, skilling the workers. So the first one we have, and this one came in from Yi, and he's directed to the panel, is there a gap between skilled workers to maintain conventional vehicles and skilled workers to maintain electric vehicles? Can they be the same group of workers?
It's a super question. I'll give it a shot, Megan. Yeah, great question. I mean, the way I look at it is it's probably both of those things, reskilling and upskilling. I mean, if we take it from just a driving perspective, most of the commercial electric vehicles do need the driver to undertake some specialised training. So we definitely say that it's different to what the marketplace would be used to. And then you start to look at the technology and, what would be required of the vehicle. So, if there's any kind of technical breakdown while it's operating, what kind of support is going to be needed. It's probably a little different than having RACQ come out today, or indeed that kind of organisation having to retrain and upskill. So I do see that there's kind of those needs in the marketplace, and then whether that's kind of the maintenance aspects and what would be a traditional sort of mechanic and those kind of places would equally need to undertake some sort of training. So again, it's connected to sort of industry change and what I would say is opportunity for people to sort of step into these things. Again, EV's already started. This is here. These kind of needs definitely will continue to grow in the coming years.
The other factor that can, please.
I was just going to add that.
Go, Alina.
Thank you. I'm sorry. We're very excited about this one. I was just going to add that this is an emergent sector. So where you can do on-the-job training with one of the providers of any of these electric mobility-related solutions, there's often an opportunity there because those companies understand that you won't have necessarily the direct skills required and might be willing to onboard training. But additionally, I think directing the question about what training is available to the training bodies is useful because it demonstrates to them demand, and whether or not they have programs in place to upskill or to enable upskilling, they won't know that there's a demand from participants unless you ask them those questions. So please do submit those questions to the training bodies and get them thinking about it now.
Awesome. And Sean?
The maintenance of an internal combustion engine is very different from the maintenance of a electrical propulsion system because there are far less moving parts. I mean, the steering wheel rotates and the wheel bearings rotate, but there's not the components that you have in an internal combustion engine, be it diesel or petrol. I mean, the other opportunity that I think is a great opportunity for government is that if we approach this early enough, I mean, it's also manufacturing and assembly of vehicles in Australia, because I think that the barriers towards moving towards assembly of, I think that already bus manufacturers are looking at vertically integrating their operations to increase the level of local content in vehicles. This is another great opportunity, I believe, for government industry policy to look at what the opportunities for Australian jobs are in this emerging market.
Exactly. Excellent. Look, I really do appreciate all your time today. I think we've come to the end of our session. So if I could just thank you again for your time, and I'd invite the audience to also to thank them for tuning in and hearing Alina, Brendan and Sean provide their time and insights into this interesting topic today. I would definitely like to thank Engineers Australia's industry partner, ABB, for making our webinar possible today. And we would appreciate your feedback on the program. So, to help us improve and plan for future sessions, if you could please complete the short feedback form, which is linked in the description box below. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.